So the next point that they brought up, the animators, was wides and narrows. So a lot of times we get facial rigs that have an extremely hard time widening and narrowing the mouth without it going off model and just looking funky. So we always try to recommend to everybody and to make sure they understand that they need to build in functionality to properly widen and narrow the mouth. Now, for example, let me zero this out. Try to go a little slower for the people with slow refresh rate. So if I look at this from sort of a downward angle, and right now I'm looking at the, let's use my, sort of looking at this area right here. So what's going to happen is when this mouth widens, ideally you want it to follow the contour of the face. So depending on the orientation of your joints, or, and again, if you're using blend shapes, and this is a little easier, harder to model but easier to understand, but you're going to want to make sure that when the mouth widens and narrows, that it's not just going outwards and inwards. A lot of times we'll get rigs that have all the joints oriented to world space, and it's not, like, for example, if you're using facial mocap, that might not be a problem because the joints are being driven directly, and you're actually not doing as much local moving of the joints. But what's going to happen, if I grab this controller, this is the mouth corner joint, you can see that it's been oriented sort of with the contour of the face. Actually, that's kind of a crappy example. I don't really like the way that's oriented. I'm going to fix that. But ideally, it's going to follow. This one's actually a little better. Note to self. Anyway, you want it to move the way that the animators are going to want it to move. You don't want to make them counter animate, to pull it out this way and then animate it back in like that, which is very common. So again, a lot of this stuff may seem like common sense, but we see, whether it be experience issues or just people not having enough time to do it the way they want, we see that stuff quite a bit, where the joints are oriented to the world and they just don't move normally. They move kind of in these very, very odd ways. So still on that topic of narrowing and widening, one of the things that helps facial animation read the best in any of the CG mediums is the widening and the narrowing of the mouth. It's even if you watch a human being talk, like, hold on, let me pull up the camera again. Let's see if I can. So as you watch me talk, you're used to seeing a human talk, so you might not notice that my mouth is actually widening and narrowing a lot. And if I talk like this, and I move my mouth and I over-enunciate things like this, it looks really strange. And you say, okay, well, I don't want my animation to look like that. You're over-enunciating and this sort of thing, which is very true. However, what you get instead a lot of the times is the opposite of that. You get characters that their mouth stays like this, the same exact width the whole entire time, and there's very little life to it because it just moves. It moves up and down, and sure, my lips are making shapes and this sort of stuff, but the corners are not really moving in and out like they would. Now, I know that you guys probably have slow refresh rate, and I'm not going to talk really slow. There will be a video of this that you can watch, so that will help later. But the corners of my mouth are moving in and out a lot when I talk. And it's, the muscles here that are pulling my corners out and that sort of thing. We don't get that a lot in facial rigs. Sure, you might get controllers that pull the mouth in and out, but it either is oriented weird, so they have to counter animate it, or it just breaks the mesh. And for any number of reasons, it's very rare that we get a facial rig that can make nice wide and narrow shapes. So my suggestion to any character riggers out there is to don't neglect that. It's because it's extremely important for facial lip sync, at least in our experience, as everything in this webinar is. So a couple of real quick specific things that they talked about. For a brow squeeze control, if we look up at his brows again, actually I'm going to reopen this dude, get him back to neutral quick. For a brow squeeze control, one of the animators had a suggestion that he always likes it when a character has an attribute to squeeze his brows, and he doesn't have to move the controllers in and out. Because depending on the orientation of the brow controls and you know, other things, it might be hard to get a proper brow squeeze. So like this guy has, you know, just an attribute that they can use to squeeze like that. He said that on a lot of rigs they don't have that, and he really enjoys it. So that's just kind of one little quick thing. At least 3 controls per lip. Now, what we tend to see a lot is if we look at the mouth here, hold on. Yeah. Hide my GUI. There we go. So looking at this mouth, a lot of times what we'll see on game characters, and this is just a quick thing for the gamer artists out there. This is the setup we see. We see a corner joint, and then we see this right here for joint placement. Now, that's going to be extremely limiting for animators to make any sort of intricate mouth shape. Luckily these days hardware is getting better and we can use more joints and that sort of thing. And there's been a lot more focus on facial animation in general in the industry, which is nice. But what we would always recommend is having this sort of placement, depending on your character. Slightly different, obviously, but essentially you've got 2 in the middle, you got your corners, and then you've got, split the difference on the sides here. And then what we've actually done, if anybody's curious on that other rig, is each of these joints has 2 children, which will, oh, stupid pen, there we go, which are placed sort of on front and back. So you've got your pen, there we go. You've basically got like one joint here, and then you've got a front and a back joint, which allow the animators to work on the thickening and the thinning of the lips, as well as make even more sort of fine controls with that, which has worked pretty well for us. Let's see. Did you guys come up with an automated facial rig script that generates all those connections and attributes? Yes, we have a fully automated pipeline because we build like 1 billion facial rigs a year. So we have a fully automated rigging pipeline that sets all of this stuff up for us. We still have to artistically go in there and sculpt all these attributes and make the rigs awesome and skin it and all that sort of stuff. But the actual connections and the underlying node structure is all built automatically using our tool set, which is big time helpful. It just about cut the time in half for building a rig. We still put a lot of time artistically into the rigs because we have a lot of we work on them so much that we want we want them to be really good. So we could build a rig in one day and just do like a basic skinning pass on it and use our system and pump it out. But we always end up spending a lot of time making those shapes really shine and making them good and everything. At least as best we can. Laura says, if an animator who enjoys rigging and would like to learn how to set up facial rigs instead of blend shapes, is your setup with joints with curves to control joints, or did you use blend shapes? Let me just reread that. Laura, correct me if I'm reading your question wrong, but I think what you're asking is okay. So if we were to look at just the rig here, lots of questions starting to come through. All right, hold on, I'll get to everybody as soon as I can. Essentially, you've got this control, which is constrained to a skeleton. It's moving a joint. Now, what this whole hybrid system does kind of in a nutshell is essentially the joints are glued to, there is a layer of joints that are glued to the surface that are following the mesh, and they're actually moving these controls on a separate layer. So you keep these controls at 0, but they're still moving around with the mesh as the blend shapes turn on. So if you're an animator that's trying to learn how to set up facial rigs, I wouldn't recommend going with this system because it's incredibly confusing. It works really well, but this is something that took our rigging soup like, a few years to develop, and I've been rigging for quite a long time, and I can barely explain it myself. So I wouldn't recommend even worrying about this sort of setup if you're just starting out. What I would recommend is blend shapes are, if you're a sculptor, if you can model, like for example, like I'm a rigger, but I can't model I can make a sphere. That's about it. I can't model anything. So I've sort of gotten around that by becoming more adept at using joints and clusters and that sort of thing. You still end up having to sculpt things, but having the ability to grab your controllers and move them around and really play with it and not that sort of thing. It's easier for me. Plus, I geek out on like really complex node structures and that sort of thing. So I really enjoy complex joint rigs. So I think either way, you're gonna need to learn how to use them both. But if you're just starting out, then play around with some joints and check out some tutorials online about how to set up skinning and all that sort of stuff. And I'll point you to some tutorials after when we're done. So let's see, trying to get caught up on these questions. Okay, so Renato says, how about the file reference when adjusting? Example, back and forth when the TVs add another shape or adder while animators are animating. That's pretty, yeah, I mean, essentially we always try to reference in the rig when we're using Maya, just so that if we kind of do make a major change or any change really to the rig, then they can just get an update on it and it will propagate through their scene. One thing that will really screw up animators is if you make any major changes to the actual custom attributes and they've already animated them. That means that their animation is going to change and they might not notice. So what will happen is, they may have 3 or 4 shot or however many shots already pushed through and approved. And if you make a change to any of those custom attributes, then those approved shots are now unapproved because they've been altered. So workflow-wise, it's always better to leave the ones you've got. If you're midway through a production, do not make changes to the major phone-in shape or major presets, just because you'll most likely screw somebody up, inadvertently. That's why you end up with a lot of what we call band-aid shapes. So you might, I worked on we had a feature film rig that we worked on that had about 350 blend shapes, and I swear about 200 of them were shapes that were only used in this one specific little part. And that was because when you turned on 2 or 3 different shapes together, it would do something weird that was never, because the person sculpting those shapes didn't know that the animator was going to turn on 2 or 3 different shapes at the same time to make, whatever pose they needed to make, and ended up with a pose that just broke the rig or broke the mesh, or just, maybe it just looked funky. So they would make these what we call band-aid shapes that are sort of blend shapes that go on top of other blend shapes to sort of make them look right. So then with that workflow, though, you end up with, tons of these attributes that are really only useful in certain situations.